Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. I am your host, Hondo Carpenter, your Sports Illustrated Las Vegas Raiders beat writer. This is our guy, Johnny Guitars.
Good
All
evening.
right, Johnny Riff. Good to have you. Now, for those of you that are new to the podcast, and we are literally growing so fast, there's thousands of you that are new. Let me explain to you. Johnny is a terrific journalist who's also a highly successful attorney, owns his own practice in Buckhead near Atlanta, but a tremendous journalist. And we've been doing this for almost 20 years on the radio and everything else. And he joins us each and every week, and we deal with Raider specific issues, but then we also will grab some other issues that are Raiders, but also NFL. We got some legal issues, and we get his opinions on some issues and some other stuff. It's terrific. You guys really enjoy it. So we're glad to bring it with you. John, I want to start with the Bill Polian interview. I mean, it went viral. So many people took so much from it. Couple things stood out to me that he said. And he talked about, yes, he's the general manager, but the coach gets final say over the 53 man. He said, if I'm going to hold him accountable, then if he says to me, I really want this guy, even if I think he's wrong, I'm going to give it to him. I thought, you don't hear that very often. He's Tom Telesco's mentor. I thought that was a very big deal.
Bill Polian is a big deal in football, and what he did was kind of turn that equation completely. Yeah, I thought it was a big deal too, because he basically said, look, here's the reality of it. What that made me think was, how many times have GMs and coaches been at each other and somebody's trying to push that, well, the GM said this, the GM said that. That was interesting. We can't get enough of Bill Polian. There's a couple things I took away. I'm curious if you took them away too. The first one really was, I have probably underestimated the influence of most owners. So often we think that's the general manager, they're going to make the calls here and there, and I think maybe some of us have underestimated the owners, especially some of the older owners who are interested maybe more in a business outcome than fielding a competitive team to win every year. Folks, as some of you know, not every owner is like the guy that bought the Ravens. I'll give you an example. The guy that used to own the same franchise. So the power of the owner and the influence of the owner, that stood out to me. I was like, wow, maybe I've underestimated that a little bit. Marv Levy, I think it's not that we underestimated, forgot him, but he really seems to have shed such a powerful influence across the sport. Marv Levy sounds like did it not only the right way, he was maybe the smartest guy in the room, but he didn't have to have all the control. He wasn't trying to push people out of the way and say, no, Bill, I got this, and this is my team, my way. He had control from a perspective of being brilliant, organized, understanding, and pulling people together as a team. It's not that Marv Levy was a great coach because he made 4 Super Bowls and lost them all. It's because he got as much or more out of his roster and teams than really was there. And he did it on such a consistent basis. Marv Levy thing stood out to me. And the last thing that stood out to me, and there should be people around the sport taking notes if they haven't already, was the systematic breakdown of what it means to be drafting in the top 10 and exactly who you must get at that top 10 in those top 10 slots. If people haven't taken notes or seen that, and don't tell me that everybody in the NFL knows better. No, they don't. Have you seen who they drafted at times? They don't. They ought to be checking in and calling Bill and asking them to go through that with him. That video should be watched for many years to come around the NFL.
I got to tell you, when he talked about if you're not sure, you're sure. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's picked 2 Hall of Famers, 2 men that I would not say they were the best of their generation, but top 2 or 3 who never missed on a quarterback. That guy carries a ton of weight with me. And he's always been so incredibly kind. I just really appreciate him. I thought he was great. And another thing that really stood out to me is he's the first guy I've heard on the record. I've heard it privately. Right tackle is as important as left.
It is now, yeah. There's a couple things. One, for folks that don't know, there's been communication and interaction between the man and Bill Polian going back a long, long way. I know because I remember hearing and talking about stuff from more than a decade ago. So this is not a new connection. The right tackle now has been elevated, and it's not just because of the left-handed quarterback, it's because of some of the other stuff that's going on schematically. And it makes me
Mhm.
think about what we talked about last summer for those folks that have been with us the whole way when we talked about something that Bill Parcells laid out about how to evaluate guys that block and how that's the most difficult position to field and the most difficult draft pick to hit on, the tackles. And the elevation of the right tackle, it's not that it's necessarily the same, but we got more left-handed quarterbacks and it's climbing up there. That does speak to me loudly. It tells me again that we need to expand the rosters. And I am boiling in my head is just how many picks the Green Bay Packers have early in this draft and what they might do. They could move up, they could move down. They need some tackles help, and what a good time to have power of picks. They got something to protect. They got it cooking on the outside with receivers. So Parcells, Polian, plus Packers, those three P's came into my little football mind here.
Yeah, you got a good football mind. John, I want to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs for a minute. And you and I are pretty apolitical. I think we would both consider ourselves not really Democrat or Republican, just kind of Americans. But they get a huge rejection at the ballot box. People say, no, we're not funding with more taxes for you to have another stadium, which most of us can't afford to attend. I don't have any issue with that. Somebody's going to be willing to pay them, and that's fine. That's the reality. That's America. That's business. I don't think the Hunt family's wrong for wanting it when they look at the Raiders and what everyone else has. I don't think the people are wrong for rejecting it. It's fascinating to me where this has gone. I'd love your input as an attorney.
First thing that comes to mind is a very long time ago and a whole lot of talk ago. I talked to Uncle Ted Nugent about public funding for stadiums, and he was as disgusted and opposed to it as I am, and so many folks out there are. This might be a tipping point for public funding of stadiums. The people in Kansas City said, no, are you kidding? For more Royals and more Chief stuff, we don't want to pay for it. This is a private business. I got a private business. You got a private business. Thousands of folks watching us and listening to us have a private business. I don't have an issue at all with the people saying no. You understand them asking, but maybe this is the turning of a corner. Look, these are successful private businesses. They don't need propping and they don't need public support, but it is okay for the public to have a say in it. This is a turning point. It's going to hurt those Royals more. What's going on here in Atlanta is going to be copied over and over. We're seeing it in Baltimore. Kansas City wants to do it, etc. It's essentially having a ballpark and a community around it. It's gone pretty well. So the ask for more public funding is no surprise. The Royals are going to take a hit on this one. The Chiefs will find a way to survive, and obviously, I don't think they're not going anywhere. This is a turning point. We're going to look back at this vote in many years to come. The next round of stadiums, and it usually takes 20 or 30 years, a cycle. Let's see how many other thumbs down we get. I'm okay with it. Look, the folks in San Francisco built a beautiful baseball park. A lot of folks out there surely have been there. That was privately funded. If the business is good enough, it's going to find a way to fund its own projects and infrastructure like the stadium.
I agree. So let's talk about armed but accurate. A really good and interesting report on the quarterbacks in the NFL draft.
What we're seeing, and Bill Polian would certainly know a lot about this too, I think what we're seeing is a little bit of a shift, or the cycle's coming around to how accurate is a quarterback, and that's not a bad thing. Recently retired Nick Saban would tell you he knew very, very quickly that Drew Brees was the best quarterback he'd ever seen facing him in college and was going to be phenomenal as a pro because of his incredible accuracy and some high powered computer processing. But what we're seeing in this draft is who's accurate, who's not. And this is where I think we talk not only about scouting, Hondo, because you could say, hey, Michael Penix looks like the most accurate guy. but other guys have more arm strength. What did your team do to evaluate these guys? What do they see mechanically that can or cannot be corrected? Do they see any sign of the most dreaded word in the sport of quarterbacking, a yip? Do they see any sign of a yip? For my money, I don't recall seeing any of these top quarterbacks have any kind of a yip. But what kind of evaluation are they doing with footwork, balance, things that are going to promote accuracy? It's not just an arm strength game anymore. It's really becoming more of an accuracy game. And the 33rd team did a really pretty good detailed breakdown of who is more accurate so far, and just kind of honestly how maybe underdeveloped or inaccurate these guys are. Now, some of that game is changing. We see the Pat Mahomes model. We see Caleb Williams trying to follow it, and we've seen some bad quarterback play. We've seen our guy Dan Orlovsky talking about it on the television, breaking it down. So when we're looking at quarterbacks now, as we basically enter the middle 20s, accuracy seems to be coming up in importance. And when you're evaluating who flopped and who hit on this draft of quarterbacks, I think it's going to start with, was this guy destined to be inaccurate from the beginning? And if so, who missed that? Because somebody, it's just math. Somebody's going to miss here. What this article is suggesting, and what I would think is maybe the move right now, is err on the side of accuracy. And that new Raider quarterback, Gardner Minshew, I think he'd probably concur.
Agree with you. Stephon Diggs gets traded from Buffalo, but this guy is prone to spoil. And the Texans have moved all in. Now let's first talk about Buffalo, which I think if you look at how they performed when he wasn't the centerpiece of the offense, they were actually a better team. I put a thing out on social media the other day when they traded Diggs. You got to at least make a call on Josh Allen. They're not going to get him. He's not available. But if I'm the Texans moving all in, I'm a little nervous about bringing in Stephon Diggs. I think this was a fascinating move by Buffalo. I don't know that it was a wise move by Houston. Your thoughts?
Folks, we do not agree on every single thing, but we're coming from the same place on this one. Which Diggs are you going to get? Are you going to get the guy that maybe jumped out of school? I think he might have jumped out of school early, but are you going to get the Diggs that forced his way out of Minnesota, that was so irate with Mike Zimmer? Folks, if there's anybody left, it wasn't Kirk Cousins that he and Adam Thielen were irate with, saying you have to pass the ball at some point. It was the head coach. So he forces his way out of Minnesota after some really good play, has some great success in Buffalo, and then gets a little bit spoiled or impatient. Is that going to happen again? That's the question. The interesting thing to me is, why are the Texans, they seem to be pushing more all in a hurry. Is this a trend? Is this the move now in the NFL to try to squeeze a 3-year window into a 2, or maybe just go for it in a 1? Well, where did Diggs come from? He came from a place that's what it looked like they did in Buffalo. And they had honestly too many guys hurt last year to survive and get to and win a Super Bowl. We saw that in real time. Yes, I'm the guy that predicted them to win the Super Bowl last year and was just falling apart as they were falling apart with injury. So now they got all kinds of cap issues, and they got players leaving left and right, and they send Diggs down the road. This could be a blessing in disguise, of course, for the Bills. What interesting is, we go back to some of the discussion of chemistry and financial chemistry that Bill Polian talked about. What is Houston bringing into that room? I assume, given the benefit of the doubt, that Diggs is going to be all in, good to go, right there with everybody early on. But how is that going to go if in year 2 or year 3? I don't know. It's an interesting move by Houston because it potentially threatens the chemistry. And I'm not knocking Diggs. We're just going on his record. The folks inside of that locker room will figure it out. They are fortunate to have a very strong leader who will no doubt be working on another unique handshake for his new teammate.
Yeah, I'm just telling you. Now, I'm going to give you, if DeMeco Ryans wasn't the coach in Houston, I would be more concerned. But knowing the guy, the player, the coach, I can't imagine he had made this trade without saying to Stefan, listen, you're not coming in here and causing division and bringing your crap. He strikes me as an Antonio Pierce protect the sovereignty of my locker room. But I just think this was a huge risk by Houston. Huge risk. To me, I like what Buffalo did. There's some moves they've made that didn't make sense to me. This one does. I think they got better. All right, now let's talk about there's some interesting stuff happening with team employees in 2024. This is not a hard issue to solve. Let's talk about this.
Okay, we're talking about what happened to the Vikings, and I don't think it has a thing to do, for example, with Kirk Cousins leaving, but offensive coordinator Wes Phillips suspended for 3 weeks for a run-in with a driving under the influence. Blood alcohol test of 0.1. The legal limit is 0.8. The reason I don't think this is hard is let's just bring everybody up on technology. You can get a portable blood alcohol content analyzer that can be used before you drive. People have used
A
them
BAC machine.
yeah, alcoholic, whatever brand you want, but you can get that and use it. It's a great idea for everybody's safety, including your own, and it's a great idea for your bank account and your criminal record, etc. So why every team isn't handing those things out at the start of every season, football calendar, whatever, is beyond me. They should start doing it immediately. And if you want to make some really happy fans, have them as a giveaway, because all that does is promote people to be safe. This is not a hard problem to resolve. There are teams that have certainly not quiet, but they've got organization, they've got employees that can go get people if they're at the team outing or the function, and they're like, hey, I'm tired, I've had too much to drink. There's no reason for them to be driving around. This is just a kind of irresponsible move for a guy making close to 7 figures as an offensive coordinator out of 1 out of 32 teams. But my point is, this is not a hard problem to solve. We shouldn't see this much more. In the NFL teams, go ahead and put your logo on an alcoholic or whatever BAC machine. Send them out there, let people have fun, be entertained with them, and also let them use them so they don't get into this. This wasn't a high-level DUI. We don't know what's going to happen to it, but it's easily avoidable. And we're getting to the point where we want to see those be avoided more often than not. Just call me crazy. Give those out. Give everybody 2 or 3 of them at the start of every calendar year.
John, you are an attorney, and man, what is going on with the Bidwells, the Cardinals? I mean, this is a proverbial franchise that just, to be very honest, is almost an embarrassment. It not almost, in my opinion, it is an embarrassment to the NFL. What's going on?
People aren't embarrassed enough by them because they're out in the valley. They're not in Los Angeles or New York or Washington. A couple things are going on. There's 2 separate actions and issues. We're not talking about the offensive line coach misidentified in Mexico. That's for another day. That's under arbitration wrap for now. We're talking about Terry McDonough. His arbitration settled earlier in the week, and listen to the key line from his attorney. Despite what we consider to be a fundamentally unfair arbitration process, Terry McDonough is the first person ever to win against an NFL owner. That's what his attorney said. Okay, you can take away the big takeaway from that, folks. The guy didn't come out and hide it. They didn't like the process. We know why. We'll talk more about that in the future, too. Now, he also says why the NFL has not held Michael Bidwell accountable remains a mystery. It does. What do the Cardinals do? They take their big giant cardinal foot and stick it in their mouth. And I think we probably know who did it. By saying, we are pleased with the arbitrator's decision dismissing all of Terry McDonough's employment claims and finding that there was nothing improper about his dismissal from the team. Let me break that part down for you, folks. And I don't know that that's specific to this case, but there are many cases that are resolved where the one party paying the money does not admit to liability or doesn't have to. That may or may not be what's going on here. But this story is about to hit a higher gear. It's about to hit a higher gear because a lawsuit has been filed by that Cardinals ex-vice president, Terry McDonough. They have filed a suit against basically the Cardinals for defamation, including negligence, which is part of it. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. This is a suit against the Cardinals, Bidwell, the team's crisis communication firms, and that firm's owner and team attorney for the Cardinals and his law firm, too. What's going on here, folks? They want this to be in discovery. They want this to be in public. They want to be in court. Whatever got resolved at the arbitration doesn't feel to be resolved. McDonough really has nothing to lose here. All he's going to do is file a lawsuit and lose. But when you file a lawsuit, those are almost always filed in public. There's going to be information in that complaint that the people following the Cardinals and covering the Cardinals are going to want to get into. The watch here is how much out of the mandatory tight arbitration can Terry McDonough get? And what impact does that have on, let's say, pending and future claims against the NFL, against the NFL owners as well? It stinks in Arizona right now. We all know a couple of the main sources of that stink. I think it was last week I said this is the next guy to be bumped out as an owner in the NFL. I'm going to stick with it. Things are going to get uncomfortable for the Arizona Cardinals ownership. And remember, this is not the offensive line coach wildly fired in Mexico after being incredibly misidentified. Crazy.
So, John, I'm going to talk to you in a couple of weeks about this. How do I word this, John? The John Gruden lawsuit. We've talked a lot about it, and I just want to whet everybody's appetite. Here in a little bit, we're going to talk about this next week, but I'm hearing some interesting things from around the league that have piqued my interest.
Well, it just got a lot more interesting, not just with this arbitration and the statement from McDonough's attorney, but the lawsuit filing. I'm curious whether they filed the lawsuit because the Cardinals put out such a not wise statement after it was resolved. Had they said nothing, maybe there's not another suit filed, or maybe they already knew these guys are going to try to file. They're going to try to get it in front of a jury in court. That's going to be the interesting thing. The NFL, their arbitration clauses in those contracts, they're coming under scrutiny. They're going to be put under the microscope, and they are going to face some legal analysis. That's a bit of a wild card these days.
It's very, very interesting to me just how the whole thing is moving, the direction of this John Gruden lawsuit. It's just phenomenal to me. John, last question I had a Raider fan in the airport stop me and asked me to ask you this question, and I apologize, I don't remember his name. I think it was Ronald, but if I'm wrong, I apologize to whomever the gentleman was. But he said to me to ask you, do you ever see where fans will ever have class action lawsuits against teams or franchises when a ref blows a call, when something costs a franchise something? Is that ever anything that you see that would have legs?
Well, it's an interesting thing to come up. The short answer is probably yes. Now, I don't know what those suits would necessarily be about. We've seen people recently sue with actual damages that have a tally. They sued Madonna for starting a rock concert way too late. They had transportation trouble, they had babysitter trouble, etc. So those things have existed against individual acts. Could they sue them for something like, trading the wrong guy or signing the wrong guy? I don't know. But the attempts to sue, you can sue pretty much anybody for anything at any time. It doesn't mean it's worth anything. My guy back here, old Bucky, this nice mayor of Buckhead here, I could sue him for whatever. It's not going to go anywhere. I don't know that we're going to see anything coming here anytime soon, but the more integrated or the more connected public funding is, for example, with stadiums, that might be a window to it. There was an arena built in Detroit. There were promises made about how many jobs and how many local people would be hired. And turned out that those promises weren't really a reality. We also just saw a stadium move in D.C., Virginia, where Ted Leonsis said we're moving the Capitals and the Bullets, now Wizards, across to Alexandria and building this whole thing. And then 3 weeks later, that's out the window. They're staying in D.C. So there's some push and pull. And my thinking is that before a class action suit were filed, if there were a good reason to do so, there would probably be a resolution to it. But if you've got somebody publicly funding a stadium, for example, and there are contractual agreements between the city, the state, and the team, and they don't live up to it, there's potentially an action there. Whether or not it's class, I don't know. I don't want to get too deep in the legal weeds, but we all know on the back of the ticket or whatever, the inside of the phone ticket, you're waiving some rights when you go into a stadium. So the purpose or the nature of the class action doesn't come to mind right away. It wouldn't be surprising to me if somebody tried to file something at some point in time, and I wouldn't be surprised if it had something to do with that complex or stadium funding. But keep an eye on the state of Florida, what happens with the Jaguars, who's paying for that, etc. Keep an eye on those kind of projects. We saw a breakdown in of course, Carolina with the new owner with the practice facility they started to build. That fell out, and then they tore the stuff out of the ground. I think something like that may be fertile ground for some kind of action at some point in time. That's further down the road. What's coming on the line pretty quick? The NFL arbitration clauses are going to be under laser focus because they've got people suing teams and owners that want those things in public court.
Amazing stuff, John. Hey, tell everybody your X handle.
At JP Spartan is the place on X, Twitter. I like to call it Experience because I think that's probably what the guy wanted to call it.
Agreed. Don't forget, follow me on IG at Hondo SR, on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Hondo Carpenter, and go to si.com/NFL/Raiders. We'll see you all again with Johnny next week and with me tomorrow.